Now in this third iteration of the present value program, we're going to do three new features. First, we're going to call a function that already exists. That way we can do the full calculation the way we did with the PV function exercises earlier. Second, we're going to actually clean up that message box finally to make that text look a lot nicer. And then third, we're going to output whatever it is our calculation was in our program to the user in this output cell. All right, so let's see each of those. So as we go back into VBA, the first thing I'm going to do, as per usual, is copy my program, and I put it at the bottom. Notice as I scroll down, there's a function here. All right, this function is that fifth PV function that we made in the previous videos. That'll come up in just a second. So let's type in our new function. Let's change this to our third PV program. All right, as we're going to the third PV program, we need to get a couple new variables in. If you guys remember, we had dim cash flow as double and dim timing as integer. All right, so we have our cash flows and our timing coming in. Now we got to add those as more input boxes. So let's come back in here, copy two of these lines. We're going to take cash flows and timing. So we're going to say for the cash flows, enter, let's call this the periodic cash flow. And for the timing, we're going to say enter 0 for beginning, for end of period, 1 for beginning of period. All right, let's set our default values. Let's do a 0 periodic cash flow and a default of 0. Notice I can again make this go into more than one line. If we do our underscore, that way we can see everything. All right, so we've got our input boxes. We've got all our variables defined, and now we want to do our present value answer. However, now that we're dealing with the annuity, you remember we broke it up into an annuity piece and the present value of the future value piece. Right, so we had to do a couple of calculations. We had to do our if-then statement. Basically everything that was in that function that you just saw above. So if we scroll back up, you can see this fifth PV function. We had to do a decent amount of programming in here. We can copy all this code and use it again, but we don't have to. Instead, we can just take our fifth PV function, copy this, and move it down here to our present value of our answer. So here we're going to use our fifth PV function, and we're going to type it just like we would a function anywhere else, just like it's in Excel. And now we can type in interest rate, and it even tells me what it's looking for. Interest rate, num periods, cash flow, future value, and timing. So I type those all in, and that'll basically use that fifth PV function inside of this code. It's going to save me a lot of rebuilding my code just because I can recycle it by calling the function directly in here. All right, so that was our first big innovation. We're going to call that function to reduce the amount of math and coding that we have to do. Now let's make sure that that's working before we get too far. So let's flip back over. We'll make our button, since we're going to run this thing a few times. Assign it to our third PV program. Third PV program. Let's run it. So we have our default values in there. We now have our cash flow and our timing. And we get, again, our first value. Let's take that back out before the next time through. And now we have our information box. The present value of our cash flow is 90.9090, etc. All right, we actually don't know that it's working because we didn't put anything up here in our check value. So let's change this around a little bit. Let's do a $10 periodic cash flow and $1 for the timing. Let's just change everything a little bit differently. So now we have something more challenging to match. So let's try it again one more time, but first let's take out that message box that we didn't want. Notice I just commented it out rather than deleting it. That's one way you can keep code from executing. Now let's run it again. So for our interest rate, we want 6%. Whoops. It's all right, so another thing to learn. I just hit the escape button and it went back to my code. So here, there's a type mismatch because I exited in the middle of the code. So if I go to debug, that'll take me to the line it ended on, which was the interest rate input box that I basically ignored. We've seen this before, but if you ever get this situation where you have this yellow line, the way to get out of that, again, is to hit that reset button, that blue square up at the top. All right, so let's go fix this number to a 6% number, and now let's rerun. All right, we rerun, let's put in our 6% interest rate, our future value of 100, that looks good. Let's do 3 periods, $10 periodic cash flows, and beginning of period timing. The present value is 112.29, which does match to our check value over here that we have from the built-in Excel PV function. So it looks like our math is working, that's all good. Now let's clean up our output a little bit. Right? We don't want to see all those decimal points, so what can we use? Well, what we're going to use is the text function. The text function, for example, can take this PV output, and now we can format that as a dollar amount with 2 decimal places. If I hit enter, it now takes that 1112.29.59 and makes it $112.30. So we're going to use that same function just inside of the VBA. So let's flip over and see that. So here, instead of PV answer, just like we used before, I can use application dot worksheet function dot text, and I can use that with PV answer and type this the same way I did earlier. Actually, I realize you guys can't see this, so let me pop that down here. PV answer with our $0.00. That tells it to do 2 decimal places. And now we should have a cleaner looking message box. Let's flip over and check. We rerun our program. 6%, $100 cash flows, 3 periods, $10 future periodic cash flows, and timing of 1. And now we have a matching message box. It looks nice. The present value of your cash flows is $112.30. We've cleaned it up. Everything is looking much more nice and neat. All right, so our last step then is to put our answer right here in this output cell. So we want a way for the program to know to put something in cell C20. So the way we're going to do that is first note the name of our worksheet. So that's down here in our tabs. It's called PV subs. So whatever your worksheet's name is, we need to remember that. Because when we go back into VBA now, we're going to use a function called, we're going to do worksheets PV sub. So what that's doing is telling us to select that worksheet. The next thing we're going to pick is a range from that worksheet. The range, well, we noted we wanted it in cell C20. And the last thing we're going to say is the value. So we can go into details more later of exactly how we access different cells in different parts of the spreadsheet. But this is a great example of one way to get into the cell C20 on the worksheet PV sub. All right. Now we want to set the value of that cell equal to whatever PV answer is. That way that our internal calculation from the program then goes into cell C20, and it's stored there in case we want to do something with it later on in our spreadsheet. All right, so we have our line of code written. Let's check to see if that works. And we got to type in our 6%, $100, 3 periods, $10 future, beginning of period. Our message box popped up as before. And we have an error. We got a debug error, subscript out of range. So we hit debug, and there's something it doesn't like about this line. So let's look a little bit closer. All right, this is where it's very important to kind of keep an eye on exactly matching what your worksheet says. All right, and keeping track of how literal a computer is. Right here, the error that I made, we can see it if I flip back over, is that this spreadsheet is PV subs. No, subs with an S at the end. I typed PV sub. It's not going to work, so we have to correct that. Notice we still have to reset our workbook, otherwise we can't do anything. Notice that we still need to reset our code so it can run again. Now if we go back over, let's run it one more time, I hope. Enter all our parameters in. We got our message box still, and do we get our output? We got it there. It's not formatted properly. We didn't say to format it, but we've got our output there. It's the right number in the calculation. And so we've accomplished the 3 steps that we wanted of this last program. All right, so that's the end of how we're going to build present value functions with subs, or programs that run with these macros or click buttons. And so now you've seen both how to do present value functions with user-defined functions and with subs.